Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're so excited to be back with you. My name is Stephanie. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Produce Your Podcast, which, as you know, if you've been hanging out with us, is the agency behind the Podcast Management Academy and this group. And I'm joined by a total rock star on our team who I think you may have met once or twice, but it's been a little bit. So Tammie, say hello, introduce yourself, all that good stuff.
Hi guys, I'm Tammie. I'm the Senior Launch Specialist with Tracy DeForge's team.
Yeah, good stuff. So the reason that I have pulled Tammie into this video for you today is to give you a little bit more insight into the workflows and the process and basically all things podcast management. Now, what you guys need to know about this video is Tammie manages a lot of this process. I don't, because I'm much more in kind of the sales and marketing world. So it's quite fun because we always get to connect when I'm talking to a potential new client. I can say, hey, Tammie, like, what does this part of the process work with? Or, hey, this person is coming in with XYZ. How do we work with that? So we get to interface about a lot of that, but you'll kind of see us talk about this from really the management side of the process, but also the questions that people ask on the front end. So we're super pumped for that. But I want to dive into just everything into onboarding a new client, right? So up until this point in our somewhat mock scenario, you have found a lead, you did the sales call, you closed them. They have an amazing podcast. You're so excited. Yay, you. And now you're getting started to really work on that podcast. So essentially, you closed a client. Now what? So Tammie and I are going to walk through some of that onboarding process and just really how we kick things off. Looking at my notes, Tammie, so when we get started with somebody, there's like a number of assets and stuff that you need to essentially what we call activate them in Produce Your Podcast, right? So I know that that's like their logins and the different aspects of their podcast, but you'll be able to speak to that a little bit more eloquently. So what's like step one thing that you need once you close somebody to actually get started working with them?
Yeah, so you're going to need like all the details of that podcast. So you're going to want their basic information, when they're releasing, the hosting platforms they're on, the different podcast assets, like the graphic templates, episode templates, quote, if they're video, if they're audio. There's a lot of different things that go into a podcast that you're going to need to know right up front and how they're set up. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think most people in this group right now, they're probably the person who's doing the sales call and then probably the servicing as well. So it's interesting because, like in our agency, right, because there's two of us, I will often before the sales call actually pull up their show and look at what is the release schedule. Like, are they doing something every week? Are they doing twice a month? Is it once a month? So really understanding that cadence, because then you can get into like basically what your workflow is going to be and how often you're running that workflow in month to month. You touched on logins and passwords. So I guess that would be like their media host, right? What other logins and passwords do you normally need?
Their main one's their hosting platform. So whether it's Riverside, Buzzsprout, Libsyn's another one that's really popular. And then if you're doing their website, then you're going to need all the website logins. Social media, if you're doing social media for them as well, all those logins you're going to need.
Yeah. And just for context, too, if you're watching this video, because everybody defines podcast management a little bit differently. For us, when we talk about social media and website, that's like posting the episode to their website, right? Sometimes you'll see those like podcast players. Some websites will have like a podcast tab where like the audio or video goes. Same thing with social media, like getting access to that so you can just publish the episode promotions on behalf of them. So just FYI, in case you heard that and you're like, I'm not quite sure what that means. And then I think a big thing too, I was kind of looking at some of my notes even prior to recording this, like getting into their brand kit. So two-part question for you, Tammie. Number one, what do we get from the brand kit? And number two, why is the brand kit important from a podcast manager standpoint?
Yeah. So if the company has a brand kit, like the podcast has a brand kit, you're always going to want to stay with alignment with that brand kit because then it all flows and they'll notice that, oh, yeah, the podcast is connected to this business or the podcast is connected to this person. So if they do have a podcast branding kit, they'll have the different fonts, the colors, all their different logos, specific pictures or guidelines on what their branding is all about. And if they don't, then you're going to have to take another step and deep dive to see what they want their branding kit to be involved with then.
Yeah. We were joking earlier, like if you have a podcast centered on happiness, you're not going to have like really like dark blues and like dark coloring because it doesn't really match the overall gist of the brand. And to give context for that too, like when you put a podcast episode out in the world, there's episode art, right, that goes with each episode. And you might use that same template to create the social media graphics. So the brand kit is essentially like the epicenter of all of that, where it shows you what you're modeling everything off of. And like Tammie said, it's the fonts that they're using, the colors, all of that. And then Tammie, you said if they don't have a brand kit for whatever reason, so you would go through like their website, maybe like their social, like where do you pull inspiration from? Because then you're creating some of these templates for them.
Yeah, if they already have like a basic podcast cover, I would start with that, and then you can build off of that. If they do have a website, go check that out, or their social media pages. You'll see a similar, I don't know, what would you call it? Like,
Vibe.
yeah, they would be all kind of connected because you're always geared or move towards a certain color or a font, and you can just usually pull it from there or ask lots of questions too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. And it's creative work too, especially in that regard. So I do think like having good communication with the client, like getting some of their expectations. Also, I imagine, Tammie, when you do that, like you probably give them a couple options and like turn it around to them and just start to refine it. It's not an endless process. Like we are working on kind of a structured timeline. But I imagine if you can pull some inspiration from other parts of their brand, like you might get it pretty close. And then maybe there's like minimal edits or stuff that they would want to add. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
cool. I love it. All right. So zooming out to zoom back in, we're talking about onboarding a new client. How the heck do you get started? You close to them. Now what? In terms of onboarding, again, understanding what their release schedule is for the podcast, getting all of the appropriate logins, getting into their brand kit so you can emulate all of these things throughout the podcast process. And really from there, you're kind of off to the races, right? Like the next step is essentially your client goes and records their podcast. And now in your inbox, you have essentially the raw cut of a podcast episode. So now we're like really getting things started. This is like real life. So once you receive that audio or audio plus video from them, what is the first step from a podcast manager standpoint?
From a podcast manager's standpoint, you have a couple different things. If your clients filled out an episode form, then you'll have all the information of the title of the episode. If there's a guest, is there a headshot included? The guest bio, all the information for that specific episode will be on an episode form that we use. Taking it from there, we'll take the final video or the final audio file, throw it into Descript, grab the transcript, and then slowly work our way through that. And then once you have the transcript, we do show notes and all that good stuff from it. Descript is an amazing program now, and it seems to be multifunctioning for like vertical
Okay.
videos, horizontal videos. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Camille, who I work out with really, really closely on the team, she just raves about it all the time. I feel like we use Descript for like everything now. It's come a really long way, especially in the last
Really.
2 years. I want to go back really quick. You mentioned the episode form, and I was like writing it down. I was like, I got to put a pin in that. So, for context, what our client managers do, and that's what we call our internal podcast managers, right? So, they have, and it's on Google Forms, I believe, right? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So they just set up a Google form. The client, before they record, gives them information in terms of episode title, generally what the episode is about, the guest, if they're interviewing them, guest bio, all of the things that you would need on the back end to do the show notes. So we can actually post a sample of the episode form because I think that's super helpful. Some people can get it after the episode, but I think it's one of those things like we always do it before because then once they get out of studio, like their part's kind of done, right? Until it's the approval process. So the episode form predates them getting into studio. You have all the info that you need before they even get in and record. And then by the time they send you those files, you have a lot of the baseline info, right? So just kind of highlight that piece as well. And then you mentioned after that, so you're popping the actual episode into a tool like Descript and then pulling the transcript from there. The transcript then is kind of the home base, it sounds like, for the social media post, the show notes, right? Are there any other assets that we pull from the transcript?
I use it for pulling specific quotes,
Mhm.
timestamping for the show notes,
Yeah.
and key points.
Yeah.
It's
I feel like
great.
people are using like a lot of video clips nowadays too. So I imagine that's like an easy way to like kind of find them and be like, that sounds good. Let me like crop it and see if it looks good. So that sounds like it'd be really helpful for that too.
It definitely is.
Nice. We love Descript.
Just
Not sponsored by, but wish it was. Very cool. All right. So you go through and then, like I said, post show notes. This is where I think those brand kit assets really come back because, again, there's a graphic that goes with the episode. Now, that's uploaded through the media host, right? Like when I pull up podcasts on my phone, it'll show me the episode info, and there's always like that little graphic there to the right. So that is what a podcast manager is actually creating as
Yeah.
part of the work that they're doing, right?
Yes. Yeah. You'll
Okay.
have a template. So you'll keep with the template to keep it all branded. And then you'll just switch out the title, the episode number, as well as the guest.
Okay, perfect. Oh, I love the template. The templateness is, I don't know if that's a word, but I'm like, yeah, we like a template. It's good.
Love a template. Yeah.
Amazing. And then are you using those same templates for the social media posts? I imagine, is there any difference between the episode graphic and then what goes on social from a graphic standpoint?
I guess it depends what kind of graphics you're talking about. Like we do have quote tiles. If it's an audio episode, we do audiograms. So you could use the episode graphic, you could use a quote graphic, or you could make one specific for that episode.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's
And then
helpful.
if,
I'm always like, I know we template everything, but again, I don't see it that closely in the day to day. So it's fun for me to kind of learn these things too. All right, cool. And I'm looking at kind of my general listed notes here. So once they have everything, right? So you've created the assets, the episode is pretty much ready. At that point, we have to get client feedback and approval. I will say, I don't know if this is, I'm assuming it is, I should say that standard practice that everyone needs to be reviewed and approved prior to the episode going out, which means we need some buffer time built into the workflow between their final approval and the day it goes live. Like we're not like emailing them at 8 a.m. and being like, hey, can you approve this before it goes out at 9? That would be chaos for everybody involved. So from a timing standpoint, how much before the actual episode go live date are you getting approval from them? Like how much time is buffered in for that?
Normally it's around 7 days from the actual audio recording time to the launch date. And then for video, it's usually around 10 days.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So it's like as soon as the assets are done, as long as it's within that window, like we want them to approve and then we'll go ahead and schedule it through their media host. Yeah.
Yeah, so usually around 3 days is a good, have everything to them within 3 days. Normally we send the audio or the video file first, and then we'll send the rest of the assets after.
Love that. Okay, cool. That makes sense to me. So, okay, then my other question on all of that was how are you getting their feedback? Like, is this email? What does it look like? Like, what are you sending them? So, walk us through kind of the approval process.
Um, so the approval process, I always do by email. So then you always have that hard copy just in case somebody says, I didn't approve that, and you send it out. You always have that email to back you up. What we do at Produce Your Podcast is we have actually a Dropbox that we do as a working folder. And then we have a Google Drive folder as well, specifically for the clients to access. So then if anything happens to your episodes, we have kind of a backup. But what we do is we take that Google Drive folder and we have it into the marketing, we have the final video, and then we have the show notes, and we send that for them to approve via email.
Right. And what is like the common, like, I guess, edits they would make? Because I think a lot of it's fairly straightforward, but maybe I don't know if there's like a moment that they're like, ooh, edit that, or maybe a guest request something's taken out. So it's like, I know they're approving kind of the final project, but is there anything that's more common that people would ask for from an edit standpoint?
Usually if it's an edit standpoint for a show note, it's kind of like wording and how it's worded to get it
Right.
to more their, I guess, speech kind of thing. But as far as edits, I'm trying to think back, but I don't think I've had anything that was specific that a client was like, can you remove that? Unless
Right.
it was somebody's personal name that they didn't want in
Yeah,
there.
yeah, that makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of we have a show in our client portfolio and it's like a fertility based show. And so sometimes those guests will be anonymous. So I imagine that kind of thing where she's like, oh, I said their last name, or I don't know, something like that. That would make sense. But yeah, I think the approval is just like, does it sound good? Does it look good? Are you liking the final, product of all of this? And then you touched on something there that I thought was interesting because we talk about this a lot at Produce Your Podcast with the written assets. It does take a little bit to really understand their voice, right? Because you never want to be so formulaic and certainly show notes, there's kind of a formula you want to follow, but maybe it's like the intro sentence. There's a certain way they would want that worded. So with written assets in particular, at least from my vantage point, that's one of the things that's like, it might take you a couple rounds with the client to really understand their style, to try and emulate that a little bit. Same thing with social media, but that's where I think that communication comes back in, right? It's like, we're partnering to give you a really great show. So like, give me that feedback, right? Or give me samples that I can kind of work off of. It can only help you, right? So I imagine that's probably one of the only like back and forth things with the written assets.
Yeah. And communication is key, right?
Mm-hmm. Amen. We always joke, you guys, just to give you kind of a behind the scenes thing. So Tammie mentioned this earlier, but we do everything through email because we do want that paper trail, right? And that doesn't mean we never like call someone with a question, or like I've had clients text me questions, right? Like that's not so out of it. But it's funny because I'm like, we're always saying like, do we send too many emails? Like this person didn't respond to the email. Do we bump the email? It's just the nature of the game, right? So if you ever have that moment where you're like, should I send that email follow up? Like you do kind of have to, because remember, you're working in a very specific workflow. And when one thing doesn't go according to workflow, like other things kind of follow that, right? So, I mean, you are project managing this. You kind of have to take that leadership role in that regard to like keep things moving. But it is what it is. It's just, it's part of the game, right? So that communication's key. They'll always tell you if it needs to be less, and you can do those check-ins and say, hey, how are you feeling about our workflow and how this is going? But anyway.
Yeah, and if you do have a specific deadline, make sure you put it in there. Be like, hey, this
Mhm.
needs to be approved by Thursday at this time to make sure that our release is on schedule.
Yeah, yeah. And there's one more thing, and then I promise, Tammie, I will let you go. But there's another thing that made me think of, because we do have clients that they like the email threads, they respond to the email thread. It's basically like a one email at a time, and they'll work their way through that. We do have other clients that have essentially like a master spreadsheet where it'll have like the episode, and then there's columns for like the stage and approval. My understanding is that works really, really well for clients that are like batch recording, where there's kind of multiple things happening at once. I don't know, Tammie, from your kind of firsthand experience, what's worked there. Again, we always use email, but we've done a little bit of both. So I don't know if you have feedback on what works for one type of client versus the other, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I think a spreadsheet's great if you're recording episodes that aren't in order of release. So you can always go back to that spreadsheet and be like, okay, well, this is the date. We need to get this one done first. And we just keep filling up the spreadsheet so that we can both keep organized on either side. So
Yes. Okay. That's a really good reminder. So for context for you guys too, like we had a client where her episode cadence, they went in a specific formula. Like it was like every episode that ended in this would be this host and blah, blah, blah. But because there was multiple people involved, they weren't necessarily recording them in order. The hosts would record when they could. And so we would get different audio files and keep them organized. It wasn't like they did episode 1, then episode 2. It'd be like, this person recorded this, that has to be episode 4. This person recorded this, that has to be episode 2. So again, sometimes you don't get that, but I do think, to your point, Tammie, that's where like a spreadsheet can be helpful, because we're organizing them and the client is essentially confirming them as part of the approval process. So it's just like everyone's on the same page. I think that's the most important thing.
it is definitely.
Yay. Okay, cool. Anything else in terms of onboarding that we missed or that I didn't ask you about? So we talked through getting their logins, their brand kit. Brand kits really, again, spur all of the asset creation, the templates, things like that. They send over their recording once they get that done. And then the process really starts up until you're scheduling the episodes. Did I miss anything?
I think you nailed it.
Woohoo. We did good teamwork, friend. I love it. All right, guys. Well, we are going to put this in one of the guides in the group, so you can always reference back to it. It'll be under the podcast management workflow section. So this video is not going anywhere. You can find it later. Hello from the past, whatever. But this will be here for you. And Tammie and I'll be back. We'll do some more kind of deep dives into the process. Let us know what questions you have, what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of. All of it is fair game. And just again, thank you so, so much for being part of this community. It means the world to us. And again, stick around because we have much more coming your way. Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys.